And welcome back, students. Today, let's jump into a slightly different topic when we talk about computer. Let's just really quickly talk about software distribution. So getting started, part of what makes a computer work, obviously, is software, as we've already kind of discussed. If you don't have software, your hardware is useless. However, not all software is necessarily the same. And it's very important to kind of understand that before we kind of talk about other topics. Because there's differences such as things like cost, source code availability, etc. So let's just examine a few of these and see how they can impact the user. So first off is freeware. This is software that is available at no monetary cost or has an optional fee, like you can donate, for example. Now it's usually, but not always, closed source. Some popular examples include things like Adobe Reader and Skype. Now when we talk about freeware, we're only referring to the cost of the software, not the licensing terms. All right, so it has nothing to do with you can edit the code or anything like that. When we talk about freeware, it's simply saying it's free software. Next is proprietary. This is closed software that is available for a price, whether it's a one-time fee, it's a subscription, it's per user, whatever. There's usually some kind of fee that goes with it. Now, what usually happens is license the user under exclusive legal rights that license the user to use the software, but you don't actually own it. Great example of this is like MMOs. There was a big case study back when World of Warcraft was out. There was a big lawsuit about it, and they pretty much settled that people playing the game are kind of in effect renting the game, but they don't own the game, so they can't actually go and make like their own like pieces of it. They can't go reverse create their own servers, not legally. Now, the reason for this is that why everything's closed source is typically they don't want the user to go to doing things like modifying the code, sharing it, studying, or reverse engineering it. Because again, if you do that, well then what's the purpose of them having it free? It would be the only other option. Because if you can just have the code, well then you can just make your own version, and then the person selling it wouldn't necessarily make any money. Now, because there's a cost associated with proprietary software, it's often pirated due to users not wanting to pay the costs associated with the software. That's also why you see a lot of models with proprietary moving things to subscription-based. And we'll talk about when we talk about software as a service. Next up is open source. Open source gives universal access to the software's blueprint or code. The source code is available to the general public for use or modification from its original design. Typically, because it's open source and people aren't making necessarily money off of it, it's usually a collaborative effort that's done in building the program. We'll have different people source out different pieces of the program. Now, open source is a good thing because it typically will save about $60 billion a year for consumers. And they typically follow rules under an open source license such as either the Apache, GNU General Public, GNU Lesser Public, Eclipse, or even Mozilla. Now, those are just some examples of some of the different open source licenses. Now, a great example of open source, in case you're wondering, is Linux. Linux is open source. Remember, you can go make your own flavor of it, whether it's Ubuntu, Debian, Chrome OS, whatever. Next, let's talk about shareware. Shareware is proprietary software. Right? Proprietary meaning it's closed source that is provided to users on a limited basis and is limited to a trial version of the software. Now, there may or may not be an upfront payment. Typically, you won't have a payment because you're going to see the words such as free trial or trial version. Right? And so that's usually the key thing for you to know that something is a shareware. It's because it has those words on it. It's like, or you might, if you ever download the software, it's like you can try the software free for 30 days would be an example of that. Now, one of the downsides of shareware, because a lot of these are free, is that many times you'll find that they're packed with adware. So ads will be prevalent either in the software itself or during the installation process. And as I already mentioned, similar to both that of proprietary and freeware, the source code is often closed. All right, next up, let's talk about software as a service. Software is licensed and developed usually via subscription model and is essentially hosted by the developer. What that means is that the developer is the one that has all the files, and when you go to get the software, you're downloading the files from them. You're not necessarily getting in the mail or anything like that, or going to getting off of, like, for example, Amazon um, or Walmart. You're going right to the developer and paying them directly. Now, it's typically accessed by users using a thin client via a web browser. As I mentioned, you're going right to the website, downloading software, then you're installing it. Now, it has become a pretty common delivery model for many business applications, such as Office applications, such as Microsoft Office, CAD applications, such as Autodesk and Inventor, many different payroll applications, and even other types of software, including video games. Next up, let's talk about the freemium model, because we already talked about freeware. Freemium is a pricing strategy, kind of like software as a service, which is a subscription, but this is where the software or service is provided, typically free of charge, but money is charged for additional services, features, or even virtual goods. All right, so typically this is what you think of as like the free-to-play games, for example. If you ever play a free-to-play game, like the game itself is free, but if you want to like get anything, you have to pay money for it. That is kind of what this is talking about. Now, the word freemium is a portmanteau of free and premium, so they just combine those words. And the business model has been in use by the software industry all the way back since the 1980s as a licensing scheme. So it's the whole like pay to win. It might be a kind of a newer concept for some people, but free to play or freemium in this case has been around for quite some time. All right, now we can't talk about all these different types of software without mentioning vaporware. All right, this is a term that refers to software or even hardware for that matter that is announced to the general public but is never actually manufactured nor officially canceled. It's a little different, but it can stem from development hell, which is where software just lingers and pretty much you hear no news about it. It's like, hey, we're going to make this cool thing, and then it just sits there, for a long, long time. Pretty much if it sits there too long in development, they will label it as vaporware then, because they pretty much in fact have canceled the game because they're not actively developing it. Now, with vaporware, it's often announced either months or years before its purported release, with few details about its development being released. So, for example, you might announce a new software title, and then like 2 or 3 years will go by, and you'll have like very little news about this title. Now, that has led to some consequences, such as developers being accused of intentionally promoting vaporware products in order to keep customers from switching to competing products that might have more features. If you take a look at, for example, the video game industry, they might steadily release a small trickle of news just to kind of keep people excited for this thing when it finally does release, even if there's not necessarily an intention of releasing it. All right, and our last one, which is bloatware. All right, this is not to be confused with software bloat. That's something a little different. Bloatware is typically what we kind of define as software that may be unwanted by the user. It's often packed with other software. Typically, you'll see this a lot with shareware. And the programs that get installed with bloatware tend to remain after installation or uninstallation, for that matter. And they can often interfere with the installation of other software. Right? And sometimes this extra software can even be malware. Right? And the reason why we say it's interfering is because, let's say you go get a shareware app, you download it, you install it on your computer. Most of the times you'll see where this will come from is people click next, 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 and what they've now done is they've installed like 3 other programs besides just the main program that needs to get installed. Or they won't hit like a checkbox or something like that, and it'll get installed in. So it's very important to make sure that when you're doing this, that you be aware of bloatware, because then you're like, well, I don't know how this got on my computer. Well, it might have been from you just clicking next, 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 and that's how the software got there. So probably one of the easier things to kind of avoid. Sometimes you can't help it because, like if let's say you get a new computer and the manufacturer has put their manufacturer apps on there right from the get-go, that could also be considered bloatware. You can just go ahead and remove that stuff off of there. All right, but that's going to kind of wrap us up for today, folks. So until the next time.